There we go.
Okay, it's 9 o'clock Tuesday morning, and I'd like to welcome everybody to the reconvening of the council meeting that we initiated yesterday. Even though I know I don't normally do this in the middle of a meeting, I'm going to start, because it's a new day, acknowledging that we are on the lands traditionally occupied by Indigenous peoples. They continue to care for this land, and they continue to shape the township, and we need to show our respect. I think this is very important. Hundreds of years after the first treaties were signed, they still remain relevant in guiding our decisions and our actions and our thoughts. And I think we should not forget that. Megwich. I also think with the presentations that are coming up, it's interesting to note that of our top priority, Ms. Way, you got your hand up.
We have a motion to reconvene to officially call our meeting to order, please, and thank you.
Well, we will certainly do that.
Okay, perfect.
I just want to mention that our top priority is to protect and preserve the natural environment, and I think some of what we're doing this morning will support that quite well. Okay. Do I see Councillor Bochek? There he is. Okay. So moved by Councillor Wienko, seconded by Councillor Bochek. Be it resolved that Council adopts bylaw 2020-100, being a bylaw to confirm. No, that's not the one. Sorry. Be it resolved. Same people. Be it resolved that Council now does reconvene at 9 o'clock on Tuesday, December 15th, 2020. All those in favor? All right. And we'll make it retroactive to 2 minutes ago so we can pretend everything else was part of the meeting, because it was filmed after all. Okay. Now, the next question is, are there any conflicts of interest, pecuniary interest that anybody needs to declare before we go into these presentations? I will personally declare that I am on the board of the biosphere, and while I don't see that as any conflict with what I'm doing as the chair of this meeting, it's just that I don't want that to be let me call it a hidden fact, that I am a member and an officer of the biosphere, for everyone's information. And with that, we get into deputations. And I see David Bywater's name on one of the blocks. I presume that he's with us. Good morning, Mr. Bywater.
Good morning.
I believe the screen is yours for you to tell us a little bit about IceCap.
Excellent. Can I share my screen and do a presentation?
Yes, please.
There we go. Good morning. My name is David Bywater. I'm the Conservation Program Manager at the Georgian Bay Biosphere, and it's my pleasure to be here this morning with you. We are here to report on the incredible progress that the IceCap Regional Partnership made in 2020 and share what members have planned for 2021. We'd like to acknowledge the hard work of our volunteer co-chairs, Forrest Pangra and Daryl Moffat, as well as technical and communications advisory members, and the support of Becky Pollock, Greg Mason, and Ben John at the GBB. There we go. Climate change is one of the most urgent issues we are facing, and we can only tackle it by working together. IceCap is the best response our region has as an innovative, inclusive, and cost-effective way of reducing emissions and transitioning energy systems. It's important to remember that IceCap is a regional partnership and it is less than a year old, still learning as we go. We have some confirmed members, other members that we're working with to bring on board, and a number of strong community partners. IceCap is designed to integrate municipal, First Nations, and community partners. IceCap officially launched in February of 2020, and this is our picture from our first stakeholder meeting. It's a long time ago, and we see everybody that closely together, eh? And a lot has been accomplished since then, and I want to share some of those accomplishments with you. IceCap has established many community partnerships and built community recognition along corporates. It's been the focus of a number of articles and participated in 2 studies. And perhaps one of the biggest accomplishments is that, from what we can tell, IceCap members are the first communities in Canada to include recreational boat emissions in their community assessment. And that's pretty significant, and it's getting a lot of attention. Because of COVID, just like everybody else, we had to adjust our delivery methods for community education since in-person presentations couldn't be facilitated. As a result, we hosted a number of climate change themed webinars, such as shoreline resilience and climate change adaptation, the importance of and how to calculate greenhouse gas emissions, resident energy efficiency, community gardens and food waste, upcoming Hydro One programs and partnership opportunities, as well as phantom air leaks. If you're interested in viewing these webinars, they can be found on GBG's YouTube channel. Although we didn't have a significant communications budget this past year, we worked with our partners to spread the word through media and social media and newsletters. IceCap even participated in 2 studies, a PhD study at the University of Guelph and a study on health impacts of change in Northern Ontario. It's gaining a social media presence and engaging with thousands of people. The Carbon Calculator has been an impressive tool for doing this, and we want to thank the North Bay Parry Sound Health Unit for sponsoring the contest this fall. We've also developed some community communication products specifically for the township of Georgian Bay. For example, we have developed a brochure that can be shared with your ratepayers on the importance of building shoreline resilience and tips for improving resiliency on their property. Given the ongoing high water levels experienced over the past few years, this is a really important communications product, and it's going to help with that discussion and suggest ways to improve resiliency within communities. We're just finalizing this brochure now. Community Carbon Calculator. It's a community survey was developed to gather information from your ratepayers.
We seem to be losing Mr. Bywater.
This carbon calculator surveys permanent seasonal events as well as business. Pardon me? Can you hear me?
You were cutting out for a moment.
Oh, am I? Okay. Should have got a cable internet here, should have a really good connection. I'll try to carry on from here. So far, we've had some great uptake in the township of Georgian Bay, although we would still like to see more users. As every says, the more data we have, the better confidence we have in our data. So to date, we have over 550 people in the region who have participated, with 53% of participants providing feedback on the types of programs and ways that they would like to see greenhouse gas emissions reduced in the community. And I think it's important to recognize that 76% of participants are using their utility and energy bills to enter information, which gives us great confidence in the data, but it also means that people are taking the time to complete the tool properly, which reflects that this is an important topic for many in the community. Here's the most common feedback we are seeing from the Township of Georgian Bay Community Carbon Calculator Survey results. There's interest in communication products that educate ratepayers on climate change impacts of recreational vehicles and what changes they can make to mitigate their impact. There's also interest in electric and solar subsidies, as well as food waste and composting programs. The Carbon Calculator has also collected data that's allowed IceCap members to become some of the first communities in Canada to include recreational watercraft in the community baseline of greenhouse gas emissions. The example that you see on your screen here is from the township of the Archipelago. You can see the impact boats have in this community. We found that 76% of community emissions come from recreational watercraft, and IceCap members are also having large contribution from this sector. This type of feedback can help guide your community action plan, and we are sharing results and working with Sustainable Severn Sound or Severn Sound Environmental Association on this item. Also included in our earlier budget request for 2021, we will be building off of the carbon calculator survey results as well as that shoreline resiliency piece that I presented earlier in next year. Thank you for your time today. And we're grateful to have participated with you and look forward to working in 2021.
Well, thank you very much for that. I do appreciate it. Councillors, who has questions? Or Councillor Jarvis, followed by Wanko, followed by Cooper.
David, you broke out, I saw with the archipelago pie chart there, how watercraft affect greenhouse gas emissions or their impact. But then you talk about personal watercraft. Is there do you break out the difference between boating as a community necessity for transportation or whatever versus pleasure? I don't know how you do that, but you did mention personal watercraft. So have you broken something out in that regard?
No, I don't believe we necessarily broke it out into necessary versus just more recreational.
Yeah.
But yeah, I could give you an answer in writing if you want on how exactly we came up with these calculations. That's not a problem.
Yeah, no, it's curious. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Wanko.
Yes, David, thanks for the presentation. When you do your surveys and you talk about Georgian Bay Township, are you doing your surveys just along the coastal communities in the biosphere area, or do you actually get into the inland community? Because I haven't seen any surveys myself. I'm just wondering if you're getting to the inland communities or you're just keeping your surveys to the coastal communities.
All of the township of Georgian Bay. And so we partnered with the township of Georgian Bay and then other community partners to spread the word as much as we could to improve communication. So be grateful to chat with you later on about how we might be able to improve that next year in 2021. Part of our work plan in that earlier budget request is to increase the carbon calculator survey and communications, and then develop some really neat communication products from that. So we could do it next year on that.
Just as a follow-up, so are you using social media on this, or are you actually using addresses, or how do you contact individuals within the township?
A mix of communication, social media, newsletters, communications, which could also be social media or newsletters. We've written some articles on it. So by whatever means necessary that we can get the word out.
Okay, thank you. And Councillor Cooper.
Thank you, David. Great presentation. And I'm just sort of following up with similar, but a little bit of a suggestion with regard to recreational watercraft. And that is maybe you might want to consider for the future breaking recreational versus transportation water. In other words, vessels that are used strictly for transportation as opposed to playing on the water, shall we say. I think it might be useful to get a picture on that. So I don't know whether that's part of easily done in your surveys, but if you are doing surveys, maybe that is something that you can accomplish. And I would encourage that because one is, it's like road transportation. A lot of the road transportation is getting to and from a location or whatever, and the same on the water access communities, be it the archipelago, Carling, or the township of Georgian Bay. We are, in fact, traveling over the water, and those are our roads essentially. So I know both of my watercraft that are powered, most of the time, 90% of the time, it's to and from a marina, and really very little other than maybe not playing, but going around my community, seeing other people. So just a comment. Thank you.
That's a very good suggestion. As we do these deputations and we reach out on communications, these types of suggestions are really useful. As a reminder, this is the first time Canada's had an attempt in community greenhouse gas emissions baseline to include it. So this is great feedback. I'd encourage all of you, if you haven't already done so, to pull in the carbon calculator. It'll give you an idea of what data we're asking for, and that'll help you to better understand how recreational watercraft has been calculated.
I wonder if I could just follow up on that. And, are you in any way capturing people like those who own the liverboard boats, the yachts, um, who aren't residents of the area, but they happen to boat in our area? Or the people who come visiting, they might be fishermen, for instance, who launch their boat for the day, maybe buy a tank of gas while they're here and then leave. Are you capturing in any way? I mean, I think it'd be very difficult, but the boating that's being done by the non-residents?
No, similar to transportation, if you try to calculate people who are just passing through, it is an option, but we decided not to do that in our green baselines, because when you look at developing actions, you don't really have a lot of power in developing and implementing those actions on passing through. So yeah, we focus in on residents only. People who might be launching in the township of Georgian Bay, their data would be included in their own.
Yeah, no, that I think that's fair enough. But you see, I imagine that the yachts or the cruisers or whatever you like to call the larger boats consume a fair amount of fuel, and I have no idea where that's going to be captured. Because if they come out of Toronto, I'm not sure in Toronto they're reporting their boating on Georgian Bay.
Yeah, for sure. This is just giving us a little bit of insight into your residents, but there's going to be a lot of boaters passing through that aren't going to be calculated in that. But there's other ways that you could explore doing that, making some assumptions, making some estimates. Still lots of other perhaps consider as we explore this indicator.
I see Councillor Douglas's hand and Councillor Hazelton following, please.
Thank you, Mayor Kutse. Thank you, David, for your report. David, I'm just wondering if I can get more information from you at some point with regards to how you're capturing this information. I know you just touched on through social media in any way you can, but I'd like to know how I could get my community involved in producing numbers for you from an inland lake. I'm not sure that there's much awareness on this lake anyways of what's being done here, and I think it's really great that we have this. And I would be very interested in seeing you guys being able to capture the large vessels going out, because I think that's a really big part of what's happening on Georgian Bay. There are a lot of vessels. I mean, when I get out there, which is rarely, but it seems to me there's a lot of big vessels in those marinas and a lot of big vessels moving around during the summertime and mooring in various bays. So I'd be interested if there was a way of being able to capture that data, to see you guys do that as well. But thank you for your report.
Thanks for your comment. On the second point there, yes, if a business would like to participate in the carbon calculator, we are targeting businesses as well as just residential. So those boats would be captured. Other boats, we'd have to explore another way to we discussed trying to go after data from marinas. That can be challenging and it could be confidential, but that will be one way. There's other ways that could be explored. So take note of that. Communications, we can definitely print copies of the carbon calculator. Copies were printed at the township and made available there, but of course, challenging with COVID, we can send digital copies. We have a communications package available on the carbon calculator. So there's lots of ways that we can partner with you guys to get the word out to your ratepayers.
Supplementary to that, I mean, I think I'll just speak for this particular lake that I'm on. Facebook seems to be the method of communication for most people. So if there's something that you can provide me that I could put on Facebook for people that may be interested in participating, so you can collect data from this lake, perhaps there's other inland lakes that would follow on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hazelton.
Schedule that I can share.
Thank you. I would like to ask a couple of questions here. David, you indicated that you're not yet tracking what we'll call liveaboard boats, but it would occur to me that that would be a very easy thing to track, because you could go to the marinas and find out what the fuel consumption was at the beginning of a weekend and the end of a weekend, and you'd have a really good idea as to how much fuel was consumed, You could basically take surveys of where the boats are going. Certainly if they're coming in and out of Honey Harbor because they're stationed there, that would be an easy thing to do. So I think there's some fairly simple strategies to capture a lot of that information. And as Councillor Douglas said, I think that's a very significant impact in the carbon footprint in our community. All of these large boats burn thousands of gallons of fuel on a weekend. And I think that's an important input factor. Also, I notice in your chart here, you're capturing waste, and I'm not quite sure how you are doing it, but once again, each of the marinas in Honey Harbor have a predefined population of the number of customers at that marina. And we know from the number of lifts that take place throughout the day, how much waste is being taken away, how much recycling is being taken away. And so you should be able to come up with a fairly accurate read on the waste production of residents in the community based on the lifts that are being done and taken away. And I think with a little bit of math, you could calculate the numbers that you're looking for very accurately there. So a couple of things there that might be helpful. One of the things though that I'm I'm always concerned about when I hear people talking about calculating carbon, unlike a city or an industrial area, we really don't have any industrial activity going on. We don't have much commercial going on other than to supply services to the boating and residential community. Somewhere in all of this, I'm assuming there is a balance of how much carbon is generated versus, given the environment, how much carbon is consumed. And generating carbon, yeah, I get it. That's one factor to look at. But in our community, which is definitely different than any city or other type of community, there is a massive consumption of carbon. And I'm wondering, what are you doing to provide us a balanced view of what is going on in our township with both carbon generation and then carbon consumption?
Thank you for your comments. Just to clarify, our role with regards to climate change, supporting the Township of Georgian Bay on implementing community actions. Sustainable Severn Sound or Severn Sound Environmental Association have already done that milestone 1 community baseline and corporate baseline, which would have included your waste calculations in there. So we're focusing in more on capturing or working on those community actions with you. Part of the recreational data was that it wasn't done as part of milestone 1 before. This is a bit of a first. So we're providing you with some updated information on the baseline, but more in relation to recreational boat emissions so that it can help guide some of those implementations of the actions.
All right, Councillor Cooper.
Very quickly, David, I just wanted to suggest that with respect to capturing the live aboard transient boats, almost all of them, all of those marinas are now owned by one company called Maple Leaf Marinas. And Ken McDonald, I believe, is the president of that company. So if you need some help getting in there, that would be a incredible amount of information. There's one marina alone in Midland that's 1,000 slips. So there's, I think, 4 or 5 in Penetang, 2 or 3 in Midland, 2 in Honey Harbor that are owned all by the same company, as I understand it. So there's a suggestion. Thank you.
All right, I think we'll let Councillor Bochek, because he hasn't spoken yet, have a turn, and then we're going to have to go on to the next delegation because time is moving by. Councillor Bochek.
Well, thank you, David, for the presentation. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for allowing me to speak. Councillor Cooper, you're very accurate in your statement there about one marina operator owning a number of marinas. The president of that company is Dave Rizicki, I'm sorry. And he's a great resource and really wants to get involved with the environmental side. So David, you may want to jot that name down. Ken is a very important part of that company as well too. Your challenges are definitely there. I being a boater on a liveaboard boat, but also being a resident in the township of Port Severn, you do have your challenges. I fill my boat up before it goes in the water in the spring, and I take it out at the end of it up and fuel it up again before it goes in the next year. So your challenges are there trying to track the carbon, but I really embrace what you're doing and I support what you're doing, and anything we can do to help with the climate control and the cleanliness of our water, I'm full support of. Thank you.
Okay, well, I'm going to say, Mr. Bywater, thank you very much for your presentation. It's greatly appreciated, and we trust you'll keep the communications coming with us. And all of us now, I encourage council to contact Mr. Bywater directly if you want some communications that are more specific for your particular part of the township or the general area, and because I know he'll be very forthcoming. Thank you very much. It's greatly appreciated.
Thanks, guys. Have a good day.
All right. Next on our list is one of Mr. Bywater's colleagues, namely Dr. Pollock, with regards to the Biosphere Reserve. Oh, and I see you have Ms. Arnold with you. Excellent. I'd say go.
Thank you, Mayor. Season's greetings, Council. My name is Becky Pollock. I'm Executive Director with the Georgian Bay Biosphere team. We're just in the process of moving offices this and last week, so we're very much in transition, but we're looking forward to our new, larger space for our team. I'm here today with Delana Arnold, who is the head of our communications and education programs. And we're delighted to build off some of the IceCap work that, as you know, is so young and such a new framework for working together on the Climate Action Challenge. One of the goals that David mentioned was on food sustainability, and also the idea that community gardens would meet a number of goals within the township. And so part of your commitment to IceCap in 2020 was to explore the feasibility of the community garden, and working with your outstanding staff team, Brad, Tricia, and Jen, we've been able to set the groundwork for the launch of your community garden next spring. Delana's prepared a beautiful 9-minute presentation, and we'll just walk you through that, and then we'll take any questions. Thank you.
All right, is that sharing for everyone? Perfect. Okay, thank you for the introduction, Becky. Good morning, Mayor and Council. So I'll get right into the slides about the community garden. So we just wanted to start with our vision, our shared vision for this garden. So as Becky mentioned, it is a demonstration site as in support rather of the local climate action plan, but more concrete parts of our vision include promotion of food skills, backyard gardening, growing fresh and nutritious fruits and veggies, of course. Education opportunities is a really, really big piece of this garden in many senses, and I'll talk about that a little bit more later. And of course, it's going to be a beautiful space where people can come together safely. The vision informs the goals, so improving food accessibility by providing garden beds for individuals or families. We have 8 beds planned, and I've got a diagram to show you of that. Promoting food and garden skills by encouraging home garden and through education. I think of this as sort of the ripple effect, or maybe the catalyst that the community garden is, and we see more of that throughout the community as a result. Providing produce to the local food bank, increasing the number of home gardeners with community education, again, that ripple effect, and providing accessible space for participants with special needs. You'll see in the diagram, we have 2 garden plots that do meet Ontario's Accessibility Act. You're asking yourself, how does it work? What's a community garden anyway? We grow fruits and veggies, how? So at the core, at the heart of everything are volunteers. We'll hopefully have anyway, a volunteer support group that will work not only on the build of the garden, but also those education pieces, advertising pieces, and all the things that come with building a garden. The beds themselves will be available to Township of Georgian Bay residents on a first come, first served basis, and we'll have a waiting list to know just what the interest actually is. Applications will be processed through township staff, and the plots are free, but 10% of the produce should be donated to a local food bank. That's based off the model that we use for community gardens here in Parry Sound. There's 7 in Parry Sound, and this year, just as an example, our community food bank Harvest Share received, I believe it was over 300 pounds of produce in the season. So it does add up to be a significant contribution, this 10%, or it can. Gardeners have a deadline by which to plant or seed their bed. One concern that was brought to us was, what if somebody signs up or somebody's interested, but maybe it's just well-intentioned with not action. So they do have a deadline. It is strictly enforced. If a garden bed remains empty, we will be planting it. There will be no empty beds by late June. You can be guaranteed of that. And we're also hoping to launch a bit of a mentorship program. So mentoring would be between a seasoned gardener, pun intended, and somebody who's new to gardening, which is really the target audience, I think, for this community garden. So that's a bit about how it works. The location that we're visioning is a sunny site in front of the Port Severn Public Library. So I've done my best to illustrate where that would be on an aerial image. And I don't know if you can see my laser pointer, but that yellow square is essentially the dimensions of the garden that we're looking at. And on the bottom image, you can see it would be sort of right in front of the library building there. So it would be a fenced in space. And you can see in this aerial image, this shaded box is actually a native plant garden that we built in 2019. We would just have to move a couple of the plants. There would be the potential for a water tap in the future on this side of the building, which is excellent, very helpful. We're going to have the gate, the entrance, be facing the building, and that encourages people to use these existing paths to access the garden rather than tramping new ones through the grass. And we also have a vision for a sign to go facing the road in front here that says community garden. This is the design. So as I mentioned, the 2 plots in the middle meet accessibility standards. There's 8 plots in total, all measuring 8 by 10 feet. I've got it in meters there, 2.5 by 3 meters as well, if that's your preference. The beds are going to be filled with a topsoil and triple mix combination. And there's actually going to be a tree wonderfully right in the center. It'll provide a little bit of shade in the hottest summer months, and it's also going to be really aesthetically pleasing. So they'll have a toolbox on site to hold basic garden tools. If you don't have a garden at home and maybe you're a first-time gardener, you might not want to go out and buy a whole bunch of tools. So those will be available for use. We'll also have to have a couple rain barrels. This is an image from one of the community gardens in Parry Sound, and you can see that some of the local classes painted the rain barrels. They look pretty cute. The rain barrels will have to be filled by the hose, which we've talked to Brad about public works or summer staff doing when the library is closed. The hose is a tripping hazard. So basically, we're always making sure that they're full and accessible to people, that there's water for them to use. We're also going to have some composting units on site. This is absolutely critical. It's hand in hand with a successful garden to have a compost. And gardeners are going to be encouraged to use them for non-disease plant waste, of course. And the finished product will be available to anyone who's using the plots. So I had mentioned volunteers early on as well. So the Biosphere and township staff are working right now to drum up some volunteer interest. There'll be roles for all level of skill sets and interests. And the first 2 major areas are the garden build itself, of course, but then some of the education programs that we want to launch right away as well. So January, it's looking like January 19th, but I'll confirm that at a later date. We're going to have a virtual meet and greet for the volunteers to sort of set some of that up and get the ball rolling for this year. All right, and I just wanted to end with a show of the support. The Biosphere has leveraged 2 grants to also support this. So the TD Friends of the Environment Foundation and Community Foundations of Canada. And we're also working with the Baxter Wards Lions Club and the Community Living in Parry Sound, as they are the community garden experts in our area. And that is everything. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Ms. Arnold. I really appreciate that. And I always see Councillor Douglas's hand already. So the questions will begin.
Thank you, Mayor Coutier. Thank you so much for your presentation. I think it's fabulous. I think the program is something that our community, especially now, could use. To get people outside, and obviously there would be rules around that and distancing and so on, I'm sure. But this is something that I've discussed with my community a number of years ago. We did try a little garden with the kids up in MacTier. Unfortunately, I think it didn't have enough parameters around it to keep it going. So I would be absolutely interested in trying to find volunteers or help our staff in any way to see a garden, maybe go up in MacTier, maybe outside the library, because there's probably already water there and maybe there's space, I don't know. But again, thank you so much, because I think this is a fantastic initiative.
Thank you very much.
I'm with Councillor Douglas. I hope this is the first of numerous gardens around the township. Councillor Wojcik.
Yeah, thanks, Becky. Great presentation. I think you're going to gain the support of not only our council, but of our community. This is a well-needed program in our township. Unfortunately, my video and audio cut out a little bit due to poor internet connectivity. My question, you may have already answered, is the use of pesticides and herbicides in these community gardens. Was there any mention of limiting or eliminating the use of the chemicals? I'll leave it at that and just let you comment on that in case I missed it.
It's a great point. I didn't include it in the presentation, so you didn't miss it. But no, it will be a chemical-free garden. As part of the application process, there's a waiver and a form to fill out, and it's indicated there that it's a chemical-free.
Great. Thank you very much for your presentation.
I'm not seeing any other hands, which must mean you made a very effective presentation. I think we're all keen on seeing this going. And I thank you very much for the work behind it and telling us about it.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care, everybody.
Yes. Bye now. All right. Third on our list of deputations, it's a full morning deputations, is Dr. Pat Chow Fraser, and the work. And I'm seeing Miss Muter and Jackie Vinden, Ms. Vinden. So I will hand it over to the three of you to present to us, please.
Okay, thank you. Okay, hello everyone. I am I'm happy today to present on behalf of Jackie, shown here, her picture taken in the summer, as well as Mary Muter. So this is a preliminary report on the 2020 water quality survey that was conducted in the nearshore waters of Georgian Bay Township. The final report and all the analyses will be available at the end of the year, around early April. So some of the background information are historic data sources that includes total P concentrations that were measured by the Ontario Ministry of Environment, collected once in spring, summer, and fall during the 2003 and 2005 period. And those are all the data that are shown here. There were also mean E. coliform, E. coli, Escherichia coli, which are fecal bacteria data from 2001 to 2009 by Carl Schaefer and Kim Schaefer from the Blue Water Biosciences, Inc. That was reported in July and September of 2009. And the fecal enterococcus data that were collected by my lab during 2012 at 30 sites in North Bay and South Bay, which are shown here. Sorry. So what I did was I entered all of the data and with all of the geographic information. If there weren't any lat longs reported specifically, then I entered the data in based on the maps, then following a location in the map, and then finding the georeferences for that. Currently, the database does not include any of the supplementary sites in Honey Harbor, but it does include Honey Harbor South, Honey Harbor North, Cognachine, Go Home Bay, Wawatezi, and 12 Mile Bay. And it does not include any of these ones here. These are still possible, but because there were no maps provided, I would have to talk to somebody who had been collecting this with Carl to determine exactly where they would have been carried out. Just a note that during the 2012, we did not analyze the data ourselves. The fecal enterococcus densities were analyzed by the firm Maxim in Mississauga. All the samples were collected by myself. It was during and after a storm event. So it was a fairly intensive storm event. And then we also came back in September and collected some, which was fair weather. So the Canadian Ontario guidelines for recreational use, this is just to get everybody on the same page. For 5+ samples, the geometric mean of 200 E. coli or 35 enterococcus is the guideline for recreational use. If there's only a single sample, then it's 400 E. coli colony forming units per 100 mil, or 104 CFU of enterococcus. Now, Carl Schaefer had proposed a guideline of 10 CFU of E. coli per 100 mil for Georgian Bay, and he provided some rationale for this. And so we are just respecting that and reporting anything that is found greater than 10 CFU of E. coli is highlighted in red so that it's consistent with his guideline. And then all values that are greater than 104, which is single enterococcus, is also highlighted to indicate exceedance of Canadian guideline. The data collected prior to 2012 were all analyzed with the Blue Water Biosciences Coley plate technique. And the densities are determined between 5 and 5,000 CFU per 100 mils. It requires that whoever is doing it pour or dispense small aliquot of the sample water into 96 wells and carefully do this so that it doesn't cross-contaminate. The plates are incubated for 24 hours at 35 degrees, and then it's read with a UV light. And then we have to refer to a chart to calculate densities. And the cost of this is $8.76 per test with a 20% discount. The fecal enterococcus samples, by comparison, were brought to the Maxim labs within 8 hours of collection, and that costs $40 per test. The data that we have collected in 2020 is by a pathogen detection system, and that system is a piece of equipment in my lab, and it was made available because we could not carry out research on another project that required this equipment because of COVID. And it's a fairly simple procedure. The 16 samples, it can only analyze 16 samples at a time, but the sample water is either analyzed for E. coli or fecal enterococcus, and they can also be run simultaneously. They can detect the samples ranging from less than 1 CFU, which is essentially no, it basically is no contamination, to over 10 to the 6 CFUs. It's relatively easy to run and standardize because there's no pouring technique that's required. You just simply pour water in and shake and put it into the to the wells. The positive results can be completed between 2 to 18 hours for E. coli and for 24 hours for Enterococcus. So by comparison, the E. coli tests are each $14 and the fecal Enterococcus is about $22 a test. There is no chance of cross-contamination unless somehow the sample, 2 different samples were mixed together, and that does not happen because we use clean bags each time. It's less time consuming to prepare the tests. We simply put the water in and then let it run. So the township of Georgian Bay wanted samples to be tested for both for fecal enterococcus, and therefore the Tecta B16 was used in 2012. We needed to also analyze for E. coli in order to be consistent with the historic information. So the B16 was the best piece of equipment for that. So these are some of the maps that show you some of the historic results from the 2009. So these are, again, geometric mean of at least 5 samples mapped out for Honey Harbor, Cognasheen, Go Home Bay, Wawatezi, and 12 Mile Bay. The 2009 and 2012 also had available geometric mean of E. coli, plus also single point Enterococcus data that I referred to in the past. So this is the first map, which is within the Honey Harbor South and North. You can see here that the geometric mean of E. coli, the size of these squares are corresponding to the number of colonies per 100 mils. So this very large one is over 50 colonies per 100 mils, all the way to the smallest one, which is 10. There is only 1 or 2 sites which had less than 10, which is what Carl had used as the reference. In the Honey Harbor North, you can see that all of these sites were within the 0 to 10, but in the south, we had some areas that were much higher. And these are just showing you that a lot of the lower slope, the lower shoreline slope, has more coastal wetlands for fish. Aquatic vegetation is also very abundant, and there are also higher road densities. So going into maps 3 and 4, which correspond to Cognasheen and Go Home Bay, we can see that there is only 1 site here that is the 20 to 30. Most of the other sites, all the other sites are less than 10. In the Go Home Bay area, in the historic range anyway, none of the sites were greater than 10. These are areas with steeper shoreline slope, many protected bays that are suitable for liveaboard vessels. The cottages are built on rocks and may be vulnerable to rising water levels. Then getting into the Wawatezi and 12 Mile Bay, we see that, again, none of the ones that Carl Schaefer had sampled in 2009 exceeded the 10 geometric mean for E. coli. These are areas for boat channels, popular picnic destinations. Currently, we have evidence of dead and dying trees along the shoreline flooded by high water levels. And then now I'm going to show you some data for Enterococcus, just to give you some idea of baseline that were collected during the storm. So I want to make sure this is that you're well aware of this. This was a one-time only following a storm and during a storm, the samples were collected. And you can see here that the Enterococcus samples that are in the ranges of 500 to 600 and even greater than 600 in one site. These are all the triangles. And then we have the squares, which are the E. coli. In the Honey Harbor area, we didn't have any that were greater than 35. So all of the ones for the September Enterococcus, it had gone back down to less than 35. At that time, Carl had observed signs of eutrophication in South Bay on the rocks and in the marinas. These pictures are taken from his report from 2007. And some of these were sampled close to where these locations are. So we've had, it's really important to note that we've had 2 decades of highs and lows, high and low water levels. And so in springtime 2006, which is in that era that Carl Schaefer sampled in the 2000s, water levels were sort of intermediate. Then but we went to a very, very low water levels, as low as in winter of 2013, showing that there's hardly any water in here. And low water levels may concentrate the nutrients and microbes and the plankton. And then we have, in summer of 2020, we have high water levels. And in fact, these high water levels may dilute out any of the nutrients, microbes, and plankton. So when we're looking at, when we're trying to interpret information from historical periods, we need to keep in mind what the water levels are during the times. So this is the low water period between 2003 and 2012. So what I did was I grouped together all of the data. These are all the raw data that are not the geometric mean, just the individual data. And I wanted to show all of the sites for E. coli so that we can compare against the 2020. And just recall that in the historic sampling, Enterococcus had not been sampled by Carl, so it's really difficult or impossible, in fact, to compare against his data, but we could do this with the E. coli. So you can see that in 2020, we sampled in some of the areas for E. coli, but we couldn't sample in all of them because we had to also sample for Enterococcus. And you can see that except for these locations here with the triangle and this diamond, that we had low levels, less than the 10 that Carl had recommended as a guideline. The areas that we did see that had the problem, if I could go back to the earlier one, some of them do overlap, some of the areas do overlap, but certainly we didn't see any of these areas. So again, just to show you. The 2020 samples were not as high as those in the past, and this could be a dilution due to greater volume of water that's associated with the higher water level. We are actually carrying out some analyses now to determine if that is a possibility. It could also be because there's lower human activities because of COVID. Again, this is something that we can't determine without further analyses, perhaps in a future year with high water levels and back to normal activities. when we were sampling for E. coli, whenever we found a sample that was high, that was contaminated with at least one colony, we collected that sample. We couldn't do this for everywhere that we went because our lab was not set up. In fact, McMaster did not allow us to get into the lab until this fall. And I was quite concerned that we wouldn't be able to process the samples. And so we only collected whenever there was a positive E. coli or Enterococcus. So I'm going to show you the data that compares the TP concentrations in 2003 to 2012 during the low water years. You can see here that really the only areas that we found to be problematic was in the Honey Harbor North and South. These are in the Oak Bay region. The data primarily, all of these ones here, all of these circles come from the Ministry of the Environment study, which were conducted in 2003 to 2005, which are again spring, summer, and fall means. The data for the Northern Honey Harbor were from the 2012 study that I carried out. And then the higher concentration than the Honey Harbor in here were also part of that. Now we can see that the 2019 and 2020, quite a bit different. Again, these are only sampled whenever we found a sample that was positive for either E. coli or Enterococcus. We see here a very, very high, this was actually over 100 to 150. And this was not just on one occasion, this was on 3 or 4 occasions. We also found some in a boat anchorage site. We also found them much higher, between 10 and 20 micrograms per liter in the Honey Harbor area, North and South Bay, Macy Bay, as well as Oak Bay. And again, these data do not fully reflect all of the conditions for the 6 regions because of the constraint that I mentioned. So I just wanted to show you a little bit more close-up of this area, Oak Bay, because of the big change that I had noticed. So in 2008, I supervised an undergraduate project student, Maggie Pang. And the purpose of that project was to collect baseline data prior to the development of the Oak Bay Golf and Marina community. And these are the sampling locations that we had established. And then in 2019, I supervised another student, Meridian Moore, and she repeated the sampling that had been carried out by Maggie to determine how changes had, what the changes were following the opening. And I'm just showing you here now the comparison before and after the opening of the Oak Bay Golf and Marina community. In 2008, we had values that were in the definitely generally much lower than the ones that we saw in 2019, where these concentrations would be deemed, these higher concentrations would certainly be deemed in the eutrophic range by most of the indices. There was only one site that went down, and that was site 8. This was in a site that was in the marina itself. In fact, because of the nature of the one sample, this is probably not changed. But all the other ones, we have 2 or 3 times higher in terms of the phosphorus. In terms of the E. coli, these are all the years. So what I've plotted here are data that are from 2003 all the way up to 2020. And I've just roughly circled these regions that I believe to be showing signs of some concern because they're elevated levels that are definitely different from background levels that you can see here. These are the total phosphorus concentrations. So I believe that the total phosphorus and the E. coli show you different aspects of what is going on with the water quality, and that's why I've presented it here. So my recommendation based on this is that we have to continue to monitor in 2021 and 2022, especially if COVID is still in effect in 2021. If we want to finally see if there is any effect of COVID activities or constraints, we will have to probably carry out for 2 more years. We should sample for E. coli in 50 sites 5 times between June and August to be representative of what had been carried out during the 2000s by Carl. And we should focus on those problem areas as well as some of the reference sites. The existing baseline for all 6 regions, the COLI plates are much more cost effective, but we need to find out how they are comparative to the tech test. So we need to conduct a direct comparison as part of a monitoring to calibrate these 2 protocols. We should also establish a program to measure the chlorophyll in those paraphytic algae that are growing on rocks and substrates. It's problematic in that a lot of the nutrients that are going in that I have measured are in the near shore area, not in the center of the bay. Also, all of these algae that are growing on are paraphytic or epiphytic. They're growing on things like plants or rocks, and they're not necessarily in the plankton that is free floating. So I think that a periphyton monitoring program can be set up. We can set it up, and then volunteers or students can then follow through. I'm going to stop sharing and answer questions, but I do have a GIS ready in case anybody wants to see some more, if they want to have a much more in-depth view of any of the areas within the bay. So apologize, the presentation is somewhat dry because it's just a series of data being presented your way, but I thought that was the best way to show you what we have to date.
All right, thank you very much. I see Councillor Douglas's hand followed by Councillor Jarvis.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the presentation. Fabulous. It's really good to see what we've entered into this year. And I think the information is really quite helpful. And yes, it's a bit dry, but at the same time, it's been quite informative. I did have a couple of questions just because I'm a layman at this one. If you could just tell me, the E. coli, that's from warm-blooded organisms, generally?
They are from, yes, they can come, yes, they're from warm-blooded. So they are in the intestinal tracts.
Okay, and the fecal enterococcus, that's more human-related?
Yes, they can, yes, they're human or mammals.
So it's both, is it?
Yes, it is. They are used, they have been used interchangeably by agencies. And so some agencies will prefer the Enterococcus, others will prefer the E. coli. You can use it for various reasons.
Okay, and I think one of the reasons, maybe I'm mistaken on this, but I don't think so. I think one of the reasons that we engaged in working with you on this was to see not only the water quality as a big picture, but also to find out whether we have problems perhaps from septic systems that may be contributing to the fecal enterococcus. In your opinion, do you feel that number is being contributed to by our, I'm not quite sure how you measure the fecal enterococcus, whether that is something that is weighted heavily on human waste, or is there a ratio there, or?
Yeah, or animal origin. Well, so unless we do a tracing, microbial tracing, that's not going to be something that we can do. It is more expensive to do that because it means that you have to use genetics analyses, which my lab would not be doing. But in terms of, I think it's kind of a slew thing that we can do. So if we go back to repeatedly to the same place and we find both nutrients and high. So if you recall that, if I could just maybe very quickly share with you again, you can see that one of the earlier ones that I showed you, there is in this area here, just trying to see. For instance, we found very, very high total phosphorus in this region. We also found some higher ones in areas that we were told might have some problems. Riddell, I don't know if that's the right pronunciation, but there was a site in here that we also found had higher, that I don't think that you could determine specifically until you actually do more follow-up. You could go back and do some dye tracing from the septic systems. You could then collect some samples during maybe a storm event and see, but I don't think from just our data alone, I think our data indicate a problem, and then you need to do more to figure that out.
Which I think is fantastic. That gives you a starting point if we, decide or down the road that ends up being a program we engage in or would like to engage in. I'm just noting on something that you just pointed out there, that in Go Home Bay, that looked like one of the areas that there was some concern higher. Just out of interest, I mean, the water that is emptying into Go Home Bay, some of that is coming from Go Home Lake. And Go Home Lake is the last lake on the chain of many lakes that dump into Go Home Lake. So the problem probably reaches further than that particular area. It could be coming from, of course, our area in Go Home Lake and then further up the chain. So it's just so important that all of our townships get on board, because what's going into Georgian Bay is essentially coming from other municipalities. But anyways, very interesting. And thank you so much for the time that you put into this. I thank you for your report. It was really quite informative for me. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Jarvis.
A couple questions. Pat, the paraphytic algae, I've got that right?
Yes.
Implications. I know that we all have witnessed, I guess, in the age of zebra mussels and sort of the demise of the zebra mussel, but a significant increase in what my kids would call slime on rocks. That is paraphytic algae, I presume. Can we get an explanation? And when you do your final report, it would be nice to know, I guess, what the implications of that are. Is it necessarily bad, good, both? And also when it comes around to things like total phosphorus, and the other nutrients that you're finding in your testing, if people could be given an idea of what those specific items tend to indicate within the water itself and how they do affect water quality. It's nice to have numbers, and it's nice to see numbers, and numbers can be really scary when they get really big. And I think it is cause for concern when we see those types of numbers, but I think we need to have I think that the layman needs to have a better idea of the specific implications of seeing things like total phosphorus increasing, or the other nutrients within the water system itself. I always find with the SSEA that we get all kinds of numbers, but never any ideas on what we can do about them, and that's something else we should be looking at as a municipality. But if we could get a better idea, if we could get explanations within the report that you finalize of what these things are, and what the implications are to our health. Because people can look at numbers all they want, but for a lot of people, they don't mean a whole heck of a lot unless there's a better explanation of what the item is that we're looking at. And then finally, my question with regards specifically to Oak Bay, since we do have some baseline data there and ongoing stuff, is there Oak Bay being a golf and country club? I presume being a golf and country club, golf courses need fertilizer. Is there a way of connecting the data that we're getting out of Oak Bay, the region around Oak Bay, to what that area is being used for?
Okay, so the first question that you, or comment or question that you referred to, is in our report this year. Our report of what we did, let's put it this way, is only E. coli, enterococcus, and total phosphorus. We didn't collect any other measurements.
Okay.
We didn't have any other measurements. It is something that we can do. And I believe what Carl did, I don't remember seeing any other nutrient besides total phosphorus from Carl's reports. So I don't think that there is any. There are some baseline based on the MOE 2003 to 2005. I believe they repeated that survey in a couple of years ago, 2016 to 2018. I think they repeated it. I don't have access to that data, but maybe the township can ask for that information. And then I could do a comparison, because there they measured all the other parameters, right? Like nitrates and soluble form for phosphorus and so on. It may seem rather simplistic, but total phosphorus is really important because it is usually the most limiting nutrient for algae. So when you add more phosphorus to a system, you usually end up having more algae. If you do have something like plants growing in the water, like in a wetland, then they do uptake a lot of that nutrients, and they can actually create a sink. When that nutrient is in the water column and it starts to contribute to periphytic growth or epiphytic growth. So epiphytes simply the algae that are growing on plants, whereas periphyton is the algae that's growing on substrate. You are going to see that occur if there is any excess amount in the water column. But in and of itself, you will always find some periphyton growing. So those are diatoms, those are some green algae. And they have this film which allows them to slide around. So a lot of diatoms have these. And that's what makes the rock slippery. But it's when they start to grow, and then you end up having filamentous algae growing on top of that. And then you start to see those shades of green. That's a true sign of eutrophication. And you can measure that. You can actually put a clean slide on over a series of months, weeks, months, through a season, and you can see the accumulation of this algae. And then you can also look to see what the species are. And there's a long history of using these algae, the presence of these algae. Dr. John Small uses them to determine acidification, eutrophication. And so the presence of certain species indicate whether or not the water body is eutrophic. So, I give a whole lecture of this to my student. What qualifies as being a problem is relative. So some people that are used to a certain type of lake, there are lakes in Alberta, for instance, that are very eutrophic, and people think it's great quality because they can get tons of fish from it. But it literally has blooms every year. But and if you remove all of that and they don't have fish anymore, they will say, oh, the quality of the lake has declined. So I think, you know, it's very important. I think in my job is not to necessarily pass judgment on what the quality is, but to present to you information so that you can make the decision as the council. But I do want to let you know that there will be more problems if you don't check what is contributing to that increase in phosphorus. The second thing about Oak Bay is, of course, it's very difficult to attribute exactly, you know, it's not a cause and effect type of thing where you can say a golf course goes in and you get, because of the increase in nutrients and the way that the land is used, that you end up getting higher nutrients. But it is a before and after, and that's about the best we can do in ecology, is a before and after. And you see that there's also a sort of a control because we have sites outside of that area, also before and after. So you can make a case. It's a burden of proof. If we know the amounts of nutrients that are being used in the golf course, of course, we don't have access to that kind of information, but you can see perhaps, you know, has there been more than what is being used and then it's flowing down? I know that on observation, when we go to the inside the Potato Island wetland, that's just off of that hole number 5, you can see the rock. When we went there in 2008, there certainly weren't sort of evidence of streams of chemicals, or, you know, the coloration of the rock has changed over time. So that could be, you could also sample the sediment within the Potato Island wetland, and you can see buildup of phosphorus in that, maybe. It's been 10 years, so it's a very short amount of time. It also depends on an area that hasn't been dredged. So, you know, so those are big ifs. But yeah, there are ways that you can maybe get to it so that you can say the burden of proof is that, yes, this has contributed to those increased concentrations. But regardless of knowing, I mean, this is where I depart on from your comment, is that it is important to find out the source, but even irrespective of that, the fact that you have a fire is important, that you have to actually note that this is happening. So I do feel that it is important to establish that it is high, and then you definitely have to find out what the root cause is.
I have to think, Dr. Chalfraser, we have to make sure we get everybody else probably want to have a question or two for you. So,
okay.
So I have Councilors Wienko and Cooper. I've seen their hands. Now I see Councilor Bocek, and I'm going to just presume that Councilor Hazelton will want to jump in. So that's the order we're going here: Wienko, Cooper, Bocek, Hazelton.
Thank you, Pat, for your presentation. As you may know, we've been conducting E. coli tests on the inland lakes for over 20 years now, using the collie plates and Schaefer's work and so on. And we've been finding that we've been doing between 6 to 10 sample sites on each of our lakes. And presently we're doing 8 of the inland lakes now. And we're finding high total values are really coming from after storms and so on, and runoff as a result of these storms. And we have certain areas that we know that we're going to have high totals. On the E. coli side, we're finding a lot of our high E. coli values are related to marinas and boat landings. And we're assuming that a lot of this stuff has to do with people arrive at the cottage and the dogs go out of the car and they do their thing right at the marina or at the landing. And that's probably what we're measuring, because, that's probably one of the major sources of our E. coli at these locations. But we have found the odd bay that has E. coli, and historically our staff have gone in and found some septic problems. We've also done a lot of, we do total phosphates on these lakes once a year, and we're finding a few problems there. My question is, I noticed you had a lot of high total phosphorus values in the South Bay and North Bay area, which is very critical to Honey Harbor. Have you been looking at or analyzing any of the work that the SSEA's done this in these two bays, South Bay and North Bay? They've had an ongoing project for several years now, and they're also finding high values and relating it to algae growth. Have you looked at their studies at all and compared them to yours, to your work?
No, if they're not available, either in a published source or semi-published source, or if it's given to us. If it's not given to us, then we can't. We just don't have access to that information. So, but if they can provide the information to us, then we can definitely include it as an analysis. But it's also important that if they are monitoring in the same sites as where we are, then there can be quite a big difference. We monitor along the shoreline and in what I refer to as the near shore, so not more than about 10 meters away. And if SSEA was monitoring the same time, we did a several study a couple of years ago in the sheltered embayments, so-called sheltered embayments, South Bay, North Bay, and in those areas, we did it in the center, in the deepest point in the lake, or in the bay. And the concentrations there are definitely very different than the near shore.
Okay, so their results are published. So I think it would be interesting to compare your results to theirs, because say they have many years of data, and they go in every 2 weeks to South Bay, North Bay, and collect water samples for chemical analysis and the plankton and so on. So I think it'd be worthwhile, a good exercise in the next year or so to compare your work with theirs, because I think it would be additional analysis and so on. And I think it'd be a lot of similarities. So I would think that would be something that you would want to do in the next year or so.
Thank you. Councillor Cooper.
Thank you, Mayor Klitzier, and thank you very much, all three of you, Pat, Jackie, Mary, wonderful report. I'm really looking forward to seeing the final report in the new year, whenever that might be. And so I do have a couple of comments and questions. I think I wanted to thank Councillor Douglas for her comments about Go Home Lake emptying into Go Home Bay. In reality, the area where there was a problem in Go Home was actually further north, not in Go Home Bay, but actually in Monument Channel. So I just thought I'd clear that up, because it's sort of interesting in that the Monument Channel issue appears to be in a very narrow bay where there are a number of cottages, there's little flushing, and the indication I'm gathering is that there may be a serious problem there. So, and it's been consistent results. So that's where that's located, and it's interesting because of the lack of flushing that might be a particular issue. But I had a couple of quick questions for you, Pat, in terms of looking at next year. I think you're suggesting that you'll be doing sort of additional things in probably a very somewhat more limited locations. I think 50 locations, and I think this year you tried different locations up to 75, if I'm correct. And so you've narrowed it down to 50 sites, but your testing generally will be a little bit more comprehensive next year because of not only the equipment you have presently, but the equipment that's available through Carl Schaefer's daughter. And then in addition to that, if you find a real problem, you have resources to be able to go and zero in on a specific site. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, okay, so absolutely. It'll be a much more comprehensive nutrient suite. So we normally do 6 forms of nutrients, 3 forms of nitrogen and 3 forms of phosphorus. And so we would, 2 forms of phosphorus and then chlorophyll. So we would definitely want to include the entire suite. Plus we would, do the everything that has to do with physical. So I think it's important to undertake in some of the deeper areas just to see what the profile is, which we didn't have a chance to do at all, the temperature and the dissolved oxygen profiles. In terms of the tracing, we have a lab that we can probably, I can talk to one of the researchers who's actually doing the DNA analysis. They're doing some microbial tracing, and it may be possible that we could collect some samples from a couple of these and work out to see if it is human or versus animal. I can't promise this because this is something that, this is a colleague that I would have to talk to and just see whether or not we can, maybe it might mean having one of my students go in and run the analyses or whatever, but it would be doing the genetics of it. But I do think that that is the next step. Like if you consistently find a problem, then the next step is to find out what the origin of that is. And certainly at least eliminate whether it's human or not, and then you can determine if it is fecal from human from the septics. If it is not human, then I think it was Paul who mentioned that if it is basically dogs and other mammals that are causing this, then you'll have to have better education for people about allowing their dogs to wander into the water or whatever. But that is possible. But I would have to first investigate. So what I was proposing is what I can do within our lab, and certainly within our lab, we can do a much wider, more comprehensive in a smaller number of sites.
Ms. Muter, you're muted.
Sorry.
There, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes. I just want to add a couple of points because I think it's important that the council understand this. Pat hasn't talked about the restrictions that were placed on her due to COVID. She, because of COVID, had very limited access to the labs. The university imposed restrictions, and then they actually closed the labs, put padlocks on them. So she's had a lot of trouble doing analysis. So some of the analysis has come through quite late. And that's interfered with the progression of putting together a final report. I think we were both hoping that a final report would have been available by now. So I just want everybody to understand that. And of course, we had other limitations, including that our boat could not be launched until late June. So access to the bay was also restricted. Typically, we like to get out there fairly early before the cottagers really start moving into cottages so we can see what the spring conditions are. The other thing I would like to say to Paul Wianko's comments, I have been with Pat and her crew when in Honey Harbor area, when SCCA are collecting samples, and I can assure you they are collecting right smack in the middle of the bay, whereas Pat's crew are going closer to the shore. The other thing I want to say is, I don't know if it was clear to everybody, but one of the sites that we collected samples was in the Go Home River, downstream of the falls, where Go Home Lake drains into Go Home Bay. And I think Pat can confirm that the results at that site were not contaminated. And that sort of gives you kind of an indicator of that the source is maybe not coming from Go Home Lake. And Riddles Bay is some distance from Go Home River and is more of an enclosed bay, more like North Bay and South Bay. So some distance away.
Thank you.
So just wanted to clarify those points.
All right, thanks very much. Councillor Bocek. I have you next on the list. You are muted. And
Thank
my
you.
lip reading isn't that good.
Want to thank everyone for the presentation. And I understand that the testing has been done, the data has been collected, and the data has been analyzed. As most people know, I'm a boots on the ground type of guy. And my concern here is how we address the data that's been collected and analyzed, especially in the Port 7 area. There's a lot of mention always about Oak Bay, and through your data, you've shown us here that there is a potential problem there. Now, Oak Bay is on municipal sewers and water, so there's nothing to do with septic happening there. They are a bee-friendly golf course. They have mitigation for phosphorus through different means. The Oak Bay, the Green Island Channel, the Potato Island area is all flushed daily through water that comes over the Loch 45 from the Trent Severn Waterway. And basically that's the water that's come all the way from Lake Simcoe, Lake Couchiching, all the way through the Trent, and then out here in Port Severn, travels right by Oak Bay and out into Georgian Bay. So I'm wondering, we've had some discussion here about origin, and we've had some discussion here about sources. How would we be able to detect and realize where the source or the origin of the contaminants are from? You're finding them in the Oak Bay area, but are they from the Oak Bay area? And that's something that perhaps the data and the testing and everything is not showing, but how do we get to that point to find that out?
Well, I suppose there are a couple of, there are at least two ways that I can think of. What we're doing is a very spot check. I mean, these, even though we sampled 5 times over the course of the summer in the Oak Bay area, we only sampled in, I mean, Jackie can probably confirm this, but there were only 2 sites really, right, that we sampled all the time. But, and what I showed you from last summer, 2019, that data, that was only a one-time sampling. So, so as Mary said, we couldn't get in earlier, and this wasn't, the 2019 sampling was not funded by anybody. It was just a student who needed a project, and I thought that this was a good project to put on 10 years after, we sampled before the Oak Bay. So again, this is this is just an alert. There's a problem. So we can carry out a more higher resolution, temporal and spatial study to see that. But a second thing could be monitoring the water for things that I don't normally do, but which we can pay for. Things like the things that are added to the golf course, any of the herbicides that are used, or pesticides, fungicides, if there are traces of those in the water, they can't be coming from the Severn River. They are probably coming from the golf course. So, I mean, there are things, there are tracers that we can do, but then we're talking about chemistry that will probably cost some money to get analyzed.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor Hazelton.
If I may, Mr. Mayor, follow up with another question.
All right. I'm trying, we've been at this for an hour, so I want to make sure we give time for the other business we have to do.
Absolutely.
One more.
Just one other question. In the Port 7 area, especially around Oak Bay, we have a bay called Sawdust Bay. It's called that because there's about 6 feet of wood and sawdust on the bottom of the bay. And that comes right from Loch 45, right around the corner to the Green Island Channel. Is it possible that these organisms that you're finding have a lifespan, that perhaps they're in this sawdust and they're released over time, or are the elements that you're checking for something that is consumed or used, or a short time after they're produced, they can be diluted and disappear?
I can't speak to the sawdust itself because that's out of my realm. But I do know that the areas where we're finding to have inflated values of phosphorus are inside the potato island. So unless that is the area where the sawdust was accumulating, then I don't think so.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate your comments.
Councillor Hazelton.
Thank you. I'll speak a little quickly here to get through my thoughts here. First of all, Pat, Mary, and Jackie, thank you so much for the presentation. Very much appreciated, and perhaps of equal value and importance. Thank you so much for bringing Carl and Kim Schaefer's work back to life. I think it's critical. I love the fact that you've built a database. To Councillor Wianko's point, the SSEA data is published on their website, and we probably should be thinking about asking you to perhaps pull that in. However, what they do is actually very different from what you are doing. I am absolutely delighted to hear about your nearshore work, your paraphytic activities. One of the things that we have been hearing from our community on a very regular basis over the last several years is the massive aquatic plant growth and nearshore, and you are telling us that that consumes nutrients. And so I would postulate that center of the bay testing for nutrients is probably missing the point, because there's a huge amount of nutrients coming into the water that are being consumed by this aquatic plant life. We have just issued a contract to Neil Hutchison to be our environmental engineer, and Neil Hutchison wrote a paper many years ago where he stated that 100% of all the nutrients in a septic system aggressively find their way into the water in front of our cottages based on the rocks and so on. So we have him telling us that that is a very clear source of nutrients. So I am very, very interested in this nearshore assessment, in this paraphytic growth sampling, and perhaps the building of stats on that. And let me shift finally to, we have spoken with you in the past on locations for when you need to do the actual testing and use that device. And I mentioned this yesterday, I'll mention it again today and just kind of put you on the spot a little bit and ask. We have a room in the town center, which is about 12 by 15 or so, which I would like to make available to you for your testing lab, if you will. And I just wanted, again, put you on the spot. Is that room large enough to handle the kinds of needs that you have for your testing?
Yeah, it's about twice as big as what we had last year, right, Jackie? Yeah, no, that's absolutely. Does it have any kind of ventilation, or is it like, is there a window, or is it just like walled?
It's certainly a glassed room with a doorway right off. It's right at the edge of the building. I don't know what the ventilation is. I could easily imagine.
Hazelton, can we not discuss their report, and whether there's any property thing in the future? I think should be a separate discussion.
Fine. Thank you.
All right. I want to say to all three of you, thank you very much for joining us for the past hour and giving us this information. It's greatly appreciated. I'm sure I'm not the only one. I think I speak for all of council and staff that we're looking forward to your final report, and what further we can learn from your work. And thank you very much. It's greatly appreciated. You take the time.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Council, I believe we have 2 items left from yesterday, and that'd be under section 11, bylaws. And 11A is bylaw 2020-098, being the 2021 operating budget. And that was on pages 250 through 260 of our agenda that was distributed yesterday, sometime in the past. End of last week, I think it was. Ms. Boutiette, do you want to make any comments on that?
Through your worship, I believe we as a team have worked hard, including council in that team spirit, have worked hard at attaining a draft budget, which is now being proposed in a bylaw. And unless there are any council members who would like to make minor amendments, we could pass the budget. And if there are any major adjustments, we could bring it back in January.
Okay, thank you. Because from what I can tell, the numbers are comparable to what we were discussing last month. Councillor Cooper.
Thank you, Mayor Coetzee. And Julie, this is sort of a refinement to a budget item as opposed to, a massive change, but it was my understanding, we just had a report from the Georgian Bay Great Lakes Foundation and Dr. Pat Chow-Fraser. Our testing this year, which was not as comprehensive as being what is proposed next year, cost actually just under 25,000. I think it was about 24,500. There's going to be additional information, which is going to be very helpful to us in terms of algae, whatever it is, paraphytic algae analysis, which we need. So it looks like the program is going to be a little bit closer to 30,000, perhaps about, I think I was, and the indication was from the Great Lakes, Georgian Bay Great Lakes Foundation, it could be in the neighborhood of sort of 29,000, something like that. Haven't got a final number from them, but I thought we should maybe make that allowance because the amount of work that they're doing, if we were to put this out to private sources or most organizations, it would be at least 4 times this amount. So I would encourage that we make allowance for making sure that we get the full suite of services that we've been offered, including the fact that we have people like Mary Muter, who's volunteering her time to drive students around so they can do the water testing. She's using her boat. They haven't gone out and bought a boat per se. So there's a lot of incredible value here. So I would encourage that we make an allowance for that. So that's my comment.
Thank you. Have we received any quotes, if you will, from them for our consideration?
Through your worship, I think we have lost our clerk.
You're right. Oh.
Yes, her computer froze and she's trying to get back on. But you can continue the meeting if you would like, or you can give me 1 minute so I can go give her my other computer.
Well, why don't we pause for a minute?
Okay.
I I think just a minute or two should do it.
If anyone needs a bio break, this would be the time.
Now you tell them.
Well, you still have a couple minutes, I'm assuming. Oh, there she is. It's going to say my name when she comes in.
We're gonna have two of you?
Yeah. Ugh.
Okay.
Now there's two of me. Oh my God.
All right, now that our clerk has changed names.
I'm back
Okay, so I believe when you
as Jessica,
exited,
apparently.
I believe you heard Councillor Cooper's suggestion that we consider more money for Georgian Bay Great Lakes Foundation in regards to their work. And I think and then Ms. Boutiette's made the observation, well, I had noticed you were absent when I was asking her whether we'd received any quotes or invoice or anything like that from Georgian Bay Great Lakes Foundation in regard to cost estimates for the coming year. So Ms. Boutiette, back to you.
Through your worship, we've received the invoices for 2020 in 2 installments, but we have not received any written request or quote or estimate for the year 2021.
Okay, thank you. So then, Councillor Cooper, your suggestion is that we modify the budget figures, which now includes 20,000 for the Great Georgian Bay Great Lakes Foundation, to a higher figure?
Yes, we actually approved something in the neighborhood of 24,500. The 20,000 figure was incorrect. It was low. So 2020 came in somewhere around there if you put the 2 invoices together, or something close to that, as I understand it. You know, I am not following it that closely, but I did ask Mary Muter and Patchell Fraser what they thought 2021 would look like. And because of the additional work that they're doing, including all that work along the shoreline with the plates and so on, that it would be a little closer to 29,000 or so. So if we could make some, put in, let's say, that number, and we can get an estimate from them. I think they've worked up an estimate, but they just haven't sent it in.
But I do believe that on our current budget, it's at 20,000 at this time.
That's correct.
Okay, so then my question to the rest of council, would you entertain any changes to the budget in regards to the Georgian Bay Great Lakes Foundation? Councillor Bochek.
My question would be to our finance department. We did have a session on councillor initiatives, and we made a lot of cuts to a lot of councillor initiatives. And I'm just wondering, this is a very important program, and I want to see it continue, and I want to see it escalate. Can the funds be derived from a reserve of another account, so that we don't have to revisit the budget and rewrite the budget at the time when an estimate or invoice comes in? Is there ability to reach into a reserve fund somewhere to continue this program, or do we need to revisit the budget and add a line item for this?
Through your worship, there's two ways of doing this. One of the ways would be to today modify item 6 and up the Georgian Bay Great Lakes Foundation's contribution to 30,000, and also modify item 8 of the bylaw, which would state that the working fund reserves to stabilize the tax rate would be $550,000 instead of $540,000. Or alternatively, council could wait until we get a written estimate and then just pass a resolution that they wish to pull it out of the working fund reserve at that time.
So if we wanted to make a change to a line item in the budget, you would need a resolution from council instructing you to do so?
Yes, and mostly because it involves reserves, and any reserve transaction has to be in the form of a resolution and or bylaw.
Well, if Councillor Cooper was willing to put forward a motion, I would certainly second it. But I trust the finance department to know the best way to fund this program moving forward. So I will leave it in your hands. And if you do need a resolution, I'm more than happy to second it at this point in time. Thank you.
Okay. I also saw Councillor Hazelton's hand response, and I'll follow that with Councillor Rianco.
So I would like to just kind of weigh in on this. I fully support increasing the the Georgian Bay Great Lakes Foundation funding. A suggestion, though, that I would be comfortable with. We've had SSEA monitoring Honey Harbor for several years. They monitor, as we've discussed and heard today, in the center of the bay. The center of the bay numbers have not changed significantly over the last several years. I would be quite happy to actually reallocate the Honey Harbor monitoring that we're paying to SSEA at least for 1 year at least, and reallocate that to Georgian Bay Great Lakes Foundation to see how extensive a nearshore and paraphytic testing that they could do to actually launch us into a new direction, because we have been doing this center of the bay, I say we collectively, but this center of the bay monitoring has been being done for 10 or 15 years, virtually no changes. And I'm not sure that we get much value on an ongoing year-by-year basis. And so, as I say, I would be quite happy to take that $19,050 that we have allocated to Honey Harbor monitoring by SSEA and reallocate that to Georgian Bay Great Lakes Foundation and encourage them to do a little bit more so that we can start to do the things that we have been asking testing organizations to do for my entire time here on council, but we've had no progress in that direction. So thank you.
Councillor Rianco.
I don't think we should be that radical in making that kind of decisions today without the input from SSEA and possibly others. I think we should be encouraging the Georgian Bay Great Lakes Foundation to work with SSEA, and maybe between the two of them, they can jointly modify their program so that they're more complementary to each other. But just to go out and cancel it on a spur of the moment because looking for $10,000, I don't think is appropriate way. I have no problem adding $10,000 to the Great Georgian Bay Great Lakes Foundations. I have no problem with adding 10,000. It's a drop in the bucket, but I would hope that over this coming year that there would be some discussions between the two SSEA and the Georgian Bay people to try to amalgamate their studies, and so we get a useful study. And also, I would encourage the work that they're doing around Oak Bay. Say SSEA is a one sample site out there, and I think the two of the groups should get together and look at the work they're doing around Oak Bay so that maybe more meaningful results can come out of that. So those are the two things I think that should be done. But 10,000, let's not argue over $10,000 and start cutting programs willy-nilly just to find $10,000. But there should be some discussions that go on next year, and maybe we can modify these programs. But I think the scientists should be providing input and some recommendations, and not just willy-nilly cut things because we're looking for $10,000.
So the sense I have is that there's a willingness to add $10,000 to GLF funding from 20 to 30,000. And I'm just going to ask Ms. Boutiette and Ms. Way the most practical. We have a motion in front of us that currently reads, be it resolved that Council of the Township of Georgian Bay hereby enacts bylaw 2020-098 to adopt the estimate for the operational sums required during the year 2021 for the purpose of the municipality of the Township of Georgian Bay. And I'm wondering if we just simply add to the end, as amended, to include an additional $10,000 for GLF. Would that serve your purposes?
Through your worship, I would just add and to be funded through the working fund reserve.
Okay. As amended to include an additional $10,000 for GBGLF funded. What was your wording from?
From the working fund reserve.
Okay. Now, Council, any further comments on this particular item? Okay. Moved by Councillor Hazelton, seconded by Councillor Jarvis. Be it resolved that Council of the Township of Georgian Bay hereby enact bylaw 2020-098 to adopt the estimates for the operational sums required during the year 2021 for the purposes of the municipality of Township of Georgian Bay, as amended to include additional $10,000 for GBGLF funded from the working fund reserve. All those in favor? Councillor Bocek, is that a vote or is that a question?
That's a question. I'm just wondering if we should put in that to a maximum of $10,000. They may only come back with a need for $3,000 or $4,000 more. I'm just wondering if the wording to a maximum of 10,000 would be appropriate.
Ms. Boutiette, can you do that?
Yeah.
Okay. To include up to an additional 10,000. Councillor Wienko, did I see your hand? No. Okay. All those in favor? And that is carried as amended.
Thank you very much.
All right. 11B, council remuneration.
Excuse me, Mr. Mayor, if I may, point of order.
Please.
Does that mean that we just passed the budget?
I believe so.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. All right. So the next item is council remuneration that I have to learn how to pronounce properly. And that is that one pager that basically says that we're freezing, that will not receive the Ontario CPI rate. I don't think the word freeze is in there, but we're basically freezing our 2021 pay at 2020 rates. And what I have, the motion in front of me reads, moved by Councillor Rienko, seconded by Councillor Bocek. Be it resolved that Council of the Township of Georgian Bay hereby enact bylaw 2020-099 to amend bylaw 2018-038 to set remuneration and expenses for members of council, including those sitting on local boards and or committees of council. Questions? All those in favor? And that is carried. Don't spend it all at once. And now, I believe, moved by Councillor Wienkel, seconded by Councillor Bocek, be it resolved the council adopts bylaw 2020-100, being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of the December 14th, 15th, 2020 council meeting. All those in favor? And that is carried. And finally, be it resolved, the council does now adjourn at 11:01 a.m., until Tuesday, November 10th. Who drafted this for me, Ms. Way? I can't hear a word you're saying, but until...
I don't know what day it is anymore. I'm just going to blame it on COVID and say I don't know what day it is. How about Tuesday, January 12th? Let's go with that.
Well, we're actually going to meet on Thursday under cow. Should we make reference to that?
No, because that's council and not cow. It's two different meetings.
I'm sure it's the same people. Until Monday, January.
Tuesday.
No, I want to call it Monday.
Oh, you want to call it Monday? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because Councillor Cooper?
Mayor Kutzior, could I get you to say remuneration 10 times quickly, please?
Remuneration. There, that's 10.
Thank you very much. And it's
not even in this one, in this particular resolution.
I know, but would you mind changing the N for an M? Thank you.
Yeah, I should. You're right. Okay, now you've lost, I don't even know what date I'm looking for anymore.
Monday, January 11th.
Thank you. 2021. So after that, now I'm gonna have to change it to be it resolved the council now adjourn at 11:03 a.m. until Monday, January 11th, 2021, or at the call of the chair. All those in favor? Okay, we are now adjourned.